The cold came early that year. Not the kind of cold that apologizes. Across a field gone white, a log cabin stands silent among the pines. A thread of smoke rises from the chimney, then dies. Inside, a woman stands at the window, counting under her breath. 11 minutes now. Her eyes never leave the road. On the sill, a stack of white envelopes. They look polite. They are anything but. Then, from the foot of the hill, the sound of hooves, steady, certain. The gait of a man who has never once been the one waiting. Her hand tightens. $340, 2 weeks, and nothing that adds up. The man ties his horse to the 14th fence post, the one her father built in the August heat, hammering and whistling some tuneless thing. That was before the cough started. A hand settles on the door latch. The cold came early that year, not the kind of cold that apologizes. Not the soft frost that melts by noon and leaves the grass sparkling. This was the kind that moved in and unpacked its bags. That settled into the walls of the cabin like it owned the place. That made the old wood groan at 3 in the morning slowly, and not quite ready to admit it. May Hale stood at the window. She'd been standing there for 11 minutes. She knew because she'd counted. Counting was something she did when her hands had nothing useful to hold, and her mind had too much to carry. 11 minutes of watching the road. 11 minutes of watching the gray sky pressed down on the pines like a lid being sealed shut. And then he came. Garrett, she didn't need to see his face to know it was him. She knew the horse. A big brown gelding with a white fleece and the kind of casual, unhurried stride that belonged to a man who'd never once been the one waiting, who'd always been the one arriving. The one with the paperwork. The one with the pen already uncapped. He tied the horse to the post nearest the gate. The 14th post. May knew it was the 14th because she'd counted those two. Years ago, when she was 7, and the world was still a place where counting things felt like a game rather than a way to keep from screaming. Her father had built that fence in 3 days flat. August. Sweat soaking through his shirt before noon. Whistling something tuneless while he worked. Walter Hale could always find something to whistle about. That was before the cough started, before the medicine. Before the bills arrived in neat white envelopes that looked polite and were anything but. Garrett dismounted. He had the walk of a man who'd foreclosed on a dozen families that season and hadn't lost a single night of sleep over any of them. Unhurried, deliberate. The leather satchel under his arm bulged with papers. Legal words on legal paper that all meant the same thing in any language. "You're done, May," her mother's voice. From the doorway to the back room, thin as paper. "Your father's asking." She didn't turn yet. One more second at the window. One more second of standing between what was coming and the man in that back room, who couldn't stand up to face it himself. Not anymore. Not since the illness had taken his legs and his lungs, and left only his mind perfectly intact, perfectly aware, perfectly helpless. Cruelest thing about consumption. It kept the mind sharp. She turned. The back room smelled of camphor and wool blankets and the particular sweetness of sickness that no amount of open windows could clear. Walter Hale lay propped against pillows that had gone gray from 43 years old. Looked 60. The illness had done what years alone couldn't manage. It had taken the largest man May had ever known and reduced him slowly, systematically, like something being whittled down to its essential shape. But his eyes were still exactly the same. "Come here where I can see you proper," he said. She sat on the edge of the bed, careful. Even small shifts in the mattress caused him pain now, and he never said so, and she always knew anyway. "I heard Garrett's horse," he said. "Don't talk, Papa. Save it for what?" Not a question. A statement, delivered without bitterness, which somehow made it worse. "We both know what day this is, girl. Don't treat me like simple along with everything else." She took his hand. His grip, surprising. Stronger than it had any right to be. $340, she said. Not because he didn't know the number, because saying it out loud made it real and things could be dealt with. Imaginary things just grew in the dark. 340. He repeated it. Quiet. I built this place with 212. Did you know that? Your grandfather gave me 200. I added 12 I'd saved working Hendrick's mill. A pause. The wet, careful breath that every exhale had become. Funny what you remember. We'll figure something. May. She stopped. I need you to hear me. His thumb moved across her knuckles. Slow. I have failed you. I have failed your mother. I built a life on this mountain that turned out to be nothing but the memory of a life. And I need you to know that I know that. Before whatever comes next. I need you to know. You got sick, she said. That's not the same as failing. It is when you leave your daughter to carry what you couldn't. She didn't answer, because he wasn't wrong. And they were both past the point of comfortable untruths. She found Garrett in the main room. He'd let himself in. Of course he had. Men like Garrett didn't wait on porches. They installed themselves in your spaces and rearranged the air until you were the guest and they were the host, and somehow this had all happened without anyone saying a word about it. He had his ledger open on her mother's table. Her mother stood against the far wall, with her hands clasped at her waist and her eyes doing the thing they'd been doing for months now. That particular combination of love and apology that broke Ma's heart every time she let herself look directly at it. She didn't let herself look directly at it, Miss Hale. Garrett touched the brim of his hat, smooth, practiced. The gesture of a man who'd learned that good manners cost nothing and occasionally made difficult conversations go faster. Perhaps you can talk some sense into your mother about the timeline here. How much? Total. He blinked. People usually opened with something softer, a preamble, an apology of their own, however insincere. They usually worked up to the number. $340, he said. Plus accruing interest from the 15th. The number hit, not because she didn't know it. She knew it down to the cent. Had known it for months, had turned it over in her mind. At night, the way you turn a stone over looking for something useful. Underneath, $340. Her father had never cleared more than $60 in a good year. They hadn't had a good year in a very long time, and if we can't pay, she said, then I'll be back on the 15th with a sheriff's order. You'll have until sundown to remove your personal belongings. Everything else becomes property of the bank. There has to be. There isn't. He closed the ledger. That decisive snap. I've sat across from 100 families like yours, Mrs. Hale. This to her mother. The ending is always the same. You'd do yourself a kindness to accept it now and spare the false hope. He turned toward the door, and that was the thing about men like Garrett. They always turned toward the door too soon. Always assumed the conversation was over because they'd decided it was over, because in their experience pitches, it always was, Mr. Garrett. He paused. I'll have your money before the 15th, May said. Every cent. He looked at her then, really looked. Not the professional assessment of before. Something closer to curiosity. Maybe even something like the beginning of respect, which he quickly smoothed back into professional distance because respect didn't help his numbers, Miss Hale, he said, gently. Which was worse than dismissive. Where would you possibly? That's my business. A long pause. 2 weeks, he said. After that, I cannot help you. The door closed behind him. Her mother sat down heavily in the nearest chair and covered her face with both hands, not crying. Helen Hale had moved past crying weeks ago into something quieter and more exhausted. Just the hands over the face. Just the particular posture of a woman who had run completely out of ideas and was waiting for something. Anything to tell her what to do next. May stood in the middle of the room. $340. 2 weeks. No job, no land worth selling, no cattle left, no jewelry beyond her grandmother's plain silver ring. She was running the numbers in her head before she'd consciously decided to run them. That was just how her mind worked. It had always been practical, even when her circumstances weren't. Especially then. Nothing added up. She already knew it wouldn't. She was still standing there, still calculating. when she heard the second horse. This one was different. Garrett's horse had come one with a sound of certainty, of someone who'd made this trip before and would make it again. Unhurried because there was no reason to hurry, this horse came differently, measured, deliberate. The hoofbeats of something built to distance rather than display. May went to the window. The rider was tall. That was the first thing. Even on horseback, even at a distance, the height registered, broad through the shoulders, dressed in worn canvas and rough wool. The kind of clothes that got that way from actual use, rather than from any effort to look a particular way. Hat pulled low against the wind, dark beard. She couldn't see his eyes from here. The horse was nothing remarkable. A mountain-bred animal with a stocky build and sure feet. The kind of horse you chose when you cared more about arriving than about how you looked doing it. He dismounted smooth, no ceremony to it. Tied the reins to the second fence post. Not the nearest one, not the most obvious one, the second one, which was the sturdiest, and walked toward the cabin with the unhurried confidence of someone who had somewhere to be and knew exactly how long it would take to get there. The knock was firm, not aggressive, just present. May opened the door. Up close, he was younger than she'd expected, 30, maybe 32. The beard added years that his face didn't actually have, and his eyes, gray. The kind of gray that could be cold or careful, depending on which way the light was falling. She couldn't tell yet which one it was. He looked at her. Not the way Garrett looked at her. Not assessing value. Not calculating. Just looking. Taking in information the way you do when you actually need it, Miss Hale, he said. His voice was low, roughened by wind and altitude, and probably by not using it very often. Who's asking? Eli Cross. A pause. I have a proposition. She waited. Her mother materialized at her shoulder. If this is about charity, it isn't. His eyes didn't move from May's. It's a business arrangement. May I come in? Every pass of common sense, she had said no. Strange men didn't appear at isolated mountain cabins with business propositions, especially not for unmarried women, with no one to intervene if things went wrong. Especially not in the middle of a crisis that made you desperate enough to hear things you'd normally never entertain. Especially not then. 5 minutes, she said, and stepped aside. He didn't sit when offered. Instead, he stood with his back to the far wall, the position that let him see both the door and the windows without appearing to be watching either. May noticed it, remembered it. Said nothing. I'll be direct, he said. I need a wife, you need money, I'm prepared to pay off your family's debts in exchange for marriage. The silence that followed had weight. Her mother found words first. That is absolutely. $340, Eli said. He reached into his coat, produced a bank draft, set it on the table, plus enough to carry your family through the winter. No conditions on the money. It's yours regardless. The marriage is a separate matter. May looked at the draft, looked at the number on it, $400. She read it twice, because her brain kept trying to make it smaller than it was. Why? She said. He looked at her. Why me? Why this? She gestured at nothing in particular. The cabin, the circumstances, all of it. You're not old. You're not obviously broken. There are women who'd marry you without the transaction. Something moved in his expression. Quick, gone before she could name it. I value honesty over performance, he said. A business arrangement is clear. No false expectations. No manufactured feelings that fall apart after the first bad winter. I know what I need. You know what you need. That's more than most people have when they start. What do you need? A wife who can manage a household in difficult country. Someone who understands that survival requires more than sentiment. He paused. Choosing. Someone who won't flinch. That's still not an answer. It's the only one I have today. May's mother stepped between them, both hands up. May, put that draft down. You don't know this man. You don't know where he comes from or what he is or... We know where we're going if he leaves, May said quietly. Helen stopped. They looked at each other, mother and daughter. Both knowing the same arithmetic, both knowing it didn't work. Mady turned back to Eli Cross. "I'll need to see where I'd be living," she said. "I'm not agreeing to anything I can't verify. That's not possible before the decision. Then the decision is no." She held the draft back out to him a long moment. He didn't move. She didn't lower her hand. And then slowly he nodded. "I can tell you this much," he said. "The home is remote. The work is real. You won't lack for shelter or food or your own space. I'm not looking for a servant." A pause. "I'm looking for someone who can stand next to me and not need me to explain everything twice. That's not enough information. It's what I'm offering." He reached into his coat again, set another card on the table beside the draft. "I'll leave both here. You have until tomorrow evening. If you decide yes, 1 bag. North Crossroads, dawn. The day after tomorrow." He moved toward the door. "If you don't come, I'll understand. And the money?" Her mother again. "If she agrees. What happens to it?" He paused at the door. "Didn't turn. Debt gets paid whether the marriage works out or not. That's not a negotiating point." Now he turned, met May's eyes one final time. "I keep my word, Miss Hale. It's about the only thing I've always been certain I could say about myself." The door opened, the door closed, and the cabin was quiet except for the sound of that mountain-bred horse moving back up the road at the same measured, deliberate pace it come. May looked at the bank draft on her mother's table for a long time. Then she went to her father. He already knew something had happened. He could tell by the quality of her footsteps coming down the hall. Walter Hale had been listening to his daughter's footsteps for 22 years, and he knew every variation. The flat, determined stride meant business. The quiet one meant grief. The one that came now, heavy and careful and a little slower than usual, meant she was carrying something she hadn't decided what to do with yet. "Tell me," he said. She told him everything, every word she could remember. The draft, the proposition, the terms that weren't really terms, just facts. She sat on the edge of his bed and laid it out the way she'd learned to lay out difficult things, plainly, without decoration, without asking him to feel any particular way about it. When she finished, the room was quiet. "A man named Eli Cross," Walter said. "Yes, I don't know the name." "I don't either. What did he look like?" She thought about it. "Like someone who spends more time in the mountains than in towns. Like someone who's used to being watched and doesn't much care about it either way." She paused. He stood with his back to the wall. Her father was quiet for a moment. "That's a habit," he said. "Not a casual one, no." Another silence. The particular kind that Walter Hale used when he was thinking hard and didn't want to waste words on the thinking part. "What does your gut tell you?" he said finally. "My gut says I don't have enough information. That's your head." "What does your gut say?" She thought about the way Garrett had left. The way the front door had hit the frame. The certainty he carried. The comfortable certainty of a man who knew he'd already won. And then she thought about the way Eli Cross had looked at her. Not through her, not past her, at her. Like she was a person with information he actually needed. "My gut says he's not lying," she said. "I can't tell you anything beyond that." Walter's hand found hers again. Same grip, same surprising strength. "A man tells you he values honesty over romance," he said slowly. "You want to know what that tells me?" "What?" "It tells me he's been lied to. Probably more than once. Probably by people he trusted." His thumb moved across her knuckles. "That's not a red flag, May. That's a wound. And wounded build walls. But they also, if they're the right kind of wounded, they tell you about the walls. Because they'd rather warn you than trick you." She hadn't thought about it that way. "He might be dangerous," she said, playing the other side. "Because someone had to. So is staying," her father said simply. "We lose the land. We lose the cabin. Your mother ends up dependent on charity or family that has nothing to spare. That's dangerous, too. Just the slow kind." She looked at their joined hands. His, thin and translucent with the illness. Hers, rough from the work she'd been doing since she was 15. "I want you to do something for me," he said. "If you go, if you decide yes, Papa. Listen, I want to keep some money hidden. Always. Not a lot. Enough. Learn the land wherever he takes you. Learn it better than he knows it if you can. Make yourself essential, not because you're afraid, but because capable people are always safer than dependent ones. A pause for breath. And remember, a contract works both ways. He's buying your presence, not your soul. There's a difference. You make sure he knows you. Know the difference. She almost smiled. Even here. Even now. Teaching her how to survive. Where did you learn all that? She asked. From watching what happened to women who didn't know it, he said. I paid attention. She leaned down and pressed her forehead against his hand. Stayed there for a moment. Just that. The night was long. Her mother paced the kitchen until past midnight, not angrily. Just because stopping meant sitting still with it. And Helen Hale had never been good at sitting still with things that hurt. You can't, she said, for the 4th time. Or the 5th. May, you cannot go off into the mountains with a man you met this afternoon. This is not how things are done. How things are done hasn't been working out very well for us. Don't be smart not being smart. I'm being accurate. Her mother sat down. Finally, heavily. At the kitchen table, where the bank draft still sat in the middle of everything like an accusation. I dreamed about your wedding, Helen said. Quiet now. Since you were small, I had the whole thing planned. The dress. Your grandmother's dress. Let out and taken in to fit you. And the church and the flowers from the garden if we could manage it. And someone decent, someone from around here who knew us and knew your father and… She stopped. I didn't dream it like this, I know, Mama. What if he hurts you? Then I leave. The money is paid either way, he said so. I come home. What if there's no home to come back to? May had no answer for that. The cabin would still be Garrett's problem by the time any letter could arrive. That was the truth, and they both knew it. She reached across the table. Put her hand over her mother's. I would rather face something uncertain, she said, than watch us drown slowly in something certain. Her mother looked at her for a long time. When did you get so old? She said finally. About 5 years ago, May said. Give or take. She spent the next day in a particular kind of suspended time. Moving through tasks, mending, checking the stove, bringing her father his noon broth, while some back part of her mind turned the decision over and over like a stone in a river, looking for the sharp edges. Looking for the place it would cut her, she packed one bag, her grandmother's sewing kit, 3 changes of clothes, the practical ones, not the good ones. Her father's watch stopped at 4:10 for the past 2 years, because no one had remembered to wind it until after it was already too late. A small leather journal with most of the pages still blank, and the hatchet from the barn. She wasn't entirely naive. 3 neighbors came by during the day. Sarah Pruitt from 2 miles east, with her bras right, with the particular excitement of other people's calamity. Old Thomas Birch, who mostly wanted to confirm the rumor before he spread it, and Meg Halloran, who was genuine in her concern and therefore the hardest to talk to. Is it true? Meg said. Eli Cross, the mountain man. I don't know who he is. May said. Neither does anyone else. That's the point. Meg lowered her voice. He comes down to Caldwell's store twice a year for supplies. Doesn't talk much. Doesn't explain himself. My husband tried to ask him once where he lived exactly, and he just looked at him, like the question was interesting and also not going to get an answer. What kind of supplies does he buy? Meg blinked. What? When he comes to Caldwell's, what does he buy? Is it one man's supplies or more? Meg thought about it. More, she said slowly. I think. I never really. More. A lot of flour, salt, tools usually. Once he had a full wagon. May nodded. Meg grabbed her arm. May, be careful, please. I'm always careful, May said. It hasn't helped much so far. I'm going to try something different. The evening came quietly. She sat with her father for the last time as his daughter alone. His only daughter. His May. The girl he'd built 14 fence posts for in the August heat while whistling something tuneless. She held his hand. He talked about small things. The Sesame she'd learned to ride. The winter she'd read every book and backwards twice, just to see if it felt different. The way she'd argued with the schoolmaster about a mathematical problem and been right, infuriatingly. Precisely, Etienne had noted, even at 9 years old, and not pretended otherwise. "You're going to be fine," he said. "Better than fine, you don't know that, I know you." A pause. Breath. "That's enough." She kissed his forehead, stood in the doorway for a moment, memorized the room, the way the lamplight moved. The smell of camphor and wool and winter and love, all mixed together into the specific atmosphere of this specific room. Specific man. This part of her life that was ending whether she walked out the door tomorrow or not. "Go," he said softly, "and don't look back." Looking back never helped anyone. Dawn came gray and iron cold. May dressed in her warmest clothes. Dark blue wool dress. Her best, the one her mother had sewn 3 winters ago. Practical coat. Good boots. She pinned her hair up plain and looked in the small mirror above the wash basin, and the face that looked back was familiar and somehow changed at the same time. She recognized it. Same eyes. Same jaw. Same straight line of a mouth that people sometimes mistook for unfriendliness, when it was really just the absence of performed happiness. But something in the set of it was different. She'd made a decision. That kind of thing leaves a mark. Helen made breakfast. Neither of them ate much. They moved through the kitchen together, in that particular choreography of people who've lived in a small space for years. The small adjustments, the reaching around each other, the knowing where things are, without looking. All of it so habitual that it felt like its own kind of grief this morning. Finally, Helen wrapped the blue wool shawl around Mai's shoulders. Her hands stayed on Mai's arms. "You write to me," she said, her voice careful. "Whatever happens. Even one line. Just that you're alive and you're all right, I will. And if anything, if he's not, I'll come home." May covered her mother's hands with hers. "I promise." They both knew the promise was harder than it sounded. The cabin behind her. Her father's voice from the back room just audible. "Be brave, May, but not reckless. Be kind, but not soft. You hear me?" She heard him. She always heard. She walked out. She didn't look back. The north crossroads were Osfin, someone from the Hale property. A lonely junction marked by a weathered signpost and a cairn of stones that some long ago traveler had built for reasons no one remembered anymore. Ely Cross was already there, 2 horses, his own mountain-bred gelding, and beside it a smaller mare, dark gray with a white star, and the kind of calm, attentive eyes that told you something real about an animal's character. The mare was saddled, waiting, like she'd been told to expect someone. Ely had cleaned up since yesterday. His beard was trimmed. He wore a clean shirt under the heavy coat. It was as close to formal as someone like him probably got, and she appreciated that he'd made the effort without making it obvious that he had. "Miss Hale," he said. "I wasn't certain you'd come." "Neither was I," she said honestly. He almost smiled. "Not quite honest." "I appreciate that." He produced a small book and a folded paper from his saddlebag. "I had a circuit preacher draw up the paperwork. He's a 1/4 mile up the trail. If you're still willing." Last moment. She knew it. He knew it, the place where you could still turn around and walk back and say it was all a strange interlude. A 2-day fever dream, nothing more. The place where the story could still be. And then nothing happened. And the bank took the land, and the family scattered, and that was that. She thought about her father's face in the lamp-pole light. She thought about the number on that bank draft. She thought about the way Ely Cross had looked at her yesterday, not through her, not past her, and about Garrett and the comfortable certainty he'd carried into their home like he already owned it. "I'm willing," she said. The preacher was an elderly man with kind eyes and hands that shook slightly from age or cold or both. He asked no questions beyond the legal requirements. Read the words from a worn book in a voice that was somehow both formal and gentle. "Do you, May Ellen Hale, take this man, did she, to have and to hold, from this day forward?" She did. "I do." The words surprised her. How steady they came out, how certain. Like she'd been saying them for years, and had only just gotten around to the occasion. Ellie signed the certificate, passed the pen to her. She looked at the line for her name, at the space that would hold the last version of who she'd been. Before this moment, her hand was steady when she wrote it. The preacher was paid. Gold coins, the kind that didn't belong in a mountain settlement, and then he was gone. And it was just the two of them. And the horses. Her name is Wren, Eli said, nodding toward the gray mare. She's sure-footed in bad terrain. You'll need that where we're going. May approached the mare slowly. Let her smell her hand first. Wren dipped her nose, breathed out warm against May's palm. There you are, May thought. One friend made. How far? She asked. 2 days in good weather, he checked the sky. Weather looks to hold, and where exactly are we going? North. Up. That's not an answer. It's the only one I'm giving until we get there. He swung up onto his own horse without ceremony. Then stopped, looked down at her with those gray eyes that she still couldn't entirely read. I need you to trust the process, Mrs. Cross. Can you do that, Mrs. Cross? The name landed strange, foreign, like a word in a language she'd studied but never spoken out loud before. I can try, she said, which was the honest answer. And they turned north. The trail climbed from the first mile, through pine forest that closed overhead like a roof, blocking the pale winter sky and replacing it with something darker and quieter and older. The cold deepened as they rose. The trees thinned and thickened in alternating patches, and beneath them the snow was unmarked. Nobody had come this way recently, or if they had, the wind had erased them. Eli rode ahead. Not so far that she'd have to call after him. Just far enough to be clearly leading. She watched him. The way he sat the horse spoke of years in the saddle. Not the performative seat of someone who'd learned for show. The genuinely settled, economical posture of someone for whom this was simply how moving through the world worked. His hands were easy on the reins. His eyes moved constantly. Trees, sky, the ground ahead. With the automatic vigilance of someone who'd learned that inattention had costs. She watched his hands specifically lost. Yes. But when he adjusted his gear or checked his horse's footing on a tricky section, the movements were precise, practiced. Not the rough-and-tumble imprecision of someone who'd grown up doing only physical labor. She held that thought carefully, set it aside for later. They stopped at midday in a clearing where a stream ran under a thin skin of ice. Eli built a small fire with the efficient minimum of effort, no wasted motion, no false starts, and produced dried meat and hardtack from his saddlebag. They ate in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable. That surprised her. You're not much for conversation, she said finally. I'm not much for conversation that doesn't go anywhere, he said. If you have questions, ask them. What did you do before you came to the mountains? A pause. Not long, but there. Worked, he said. Doing what? Different things. He looked at the fire. None of them particularly interest. You're being evasive. I'm being selective. He met her eyes. There's a difference. You'll learn which one it is over time. She bit back the response she wanted to make. They were on day one. There would be time for that particular argument. There would probably be quite a lot of time for it. She turned back to her food, but she kept thinking about the hands, the gold coins. The way Garrett had looked at that bank draft and gone quiet and left without pressing his case. You're being selective, he'd said. You'll learn which one it is over time. Maybe, or maybe she'd already started learning. They made camp that evening beside a wider stretch of stream. Eli erected a lean-to in the time it would have taken May to gather enough wood, and she tried to tend the horses, brushing them down, checking their hooves, because that was what you did, and because Wren leaned into the brush with such obvious contentment that it was hard to stop. You know horses, Eli said. Not a question. He was building the fire. My father kept 2 when I was young. Before we lost them, she checked Wren's left rear hoof. Clean. He taught me. Good. Not that must have been hard to lose them, or I'm sorry about your father. Just good. Acknowledgement of fact. She found she didn't mind it. Sentiment offered too early felt like pity anyway. They ate rabbit. He'd shot it earlier in the day and dressed it so quietly she hadn't noticed. and the fire pushed back the cold, and the mountains pressed in around them in the specific way mountains do at night, not threatening exactly, but reminding you of scale, of proportion, of exactly how small the circle of firelight was and how large everything else was beyond it. "You should sleep," Eli said. "Tomorrow's harder going. What about you? I'll keep watch for a while." Against what? He looked at her across the fire, half in shadow, old habits, and then he looked away. She woke before dawn. He was already up, coffee on the rebuilt fire. He handed her a tin cup without being asked, and she wrapped both hands around it and looked at the sky going from black to the particular deep blue that comes just before the gray. She hadn't slept well. Too much thinking. Too many questions turning themselves over in the back of her mind, while the front of her mind tried to rest and failed. "How are you, Eli Cross?" Not a question she could ask yet, not directly. But she thought it. She thought it, and she drank her coffee. And she watched the dark begin to lift. And she told herself what her father had always told her. When a problem was too large to see all at once, start with what you know. You can get to the rest. From there, what she knew. He was 30-something. He lived in the mountains deliberately, not from lack of options, but from something that looked like choice. He had money. More than his appearance suggested, considerably more. He spoke like someone educated, moved like someone trained. He paid in gold and made men like Garrett go quiet, and he'd spent enough time watching her before approaching. That he'd been able to say, "I watched you stand up to Garrett," without flinching, like he'd been there. Which meant he had been there somewhere nearby, watching. She filed that under. Important unresolved. Return to later, time to ride, Eli. They broke camp, and they climbed. The trail narrowed as the morning went on. In places it was barely wide enough for a single horse. The drop to the left fell away sharp. The mountain to the right pressed close. May's hands went white on Wren's reins, and Wren moved with calm, patient certainty, each hoof placed exactly right. No drama, no hesitation. "Don't look at the drop," Eli said from ahead. "Look at where you want to go. Trust your feet." May looked forward, loosened her grip. Wren stepped even more smoothly. Good advice, she thought. Probably applies to more than the trail. They climbed for hours. The air grew thinner and colder and sharper, the kind of air that woke you up, even when you didn't want to be woken. And just when she thought they couldn't possibly go higher, the trail leveled and opened. The valley appeared below them, like something that had been deliberately hidden, a secret kept by the mountains for their own reasons. Hemmed in on all sides by peaks that were already white at the top, green still at the lower elevations, the dark evergreen of pines and fir, and winding through the center of it all, a creek that caught the afternoon light and threw it back, and buildings, actual buildings. Not one, not two, a lodge structure of timber and stone set on a rise, barns, outbuildings, a workshop with smoke coming from its chimney. Gardens, she realized, dormant now in late autumn, but clearly there, laid out in organized rows along a flat section near the creek. May sat completely still on Wren's back, looking, understanding, arriving in pieces, like ice cracking. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cross," Eli said quietly. She turned and looked at him. He wasn't watching the valley. He was watching her, looking at her face with the same careful attention he'd given her at the cabin door yesterday. Taking in information, measuring. "You live here," she said. "Yes, with." She looked back at the buildings. The smoke, the scale of it with how many people depends on the season. In winter, about 20. Not a hermit's retreat, not a solitary man's hiding place, a compound, a working enterprise. Infrastructure that didn't happen by accident or in a weekend or with a small amount of money. She looked at his worn canvas coat. She looked at his trail-roughened hands. She looked at the valley below them, with its 2 substantial barns and its managed forest, and its creek lined with deliberately placed stones. And she understood, fully, finally, all at once, that she had not married a poor mountain man. She had no idea yet what she had married. But she was looking at the beginning of the answer. "You said "You weren't lying," she said. Her voice was even. She was proud of that. "You said you were just not telling me everything." "That's correct." "How much everything?" He looked at the valley. Then, back at her enough to keep the conversation interesting for a while, he said. And he touched his heels to his horse and started down the slope. May sat there for 3 more seconds. "Be brave," her father's voice said, "but not reckless." She pressed her heels to Wren's sides, and she followed. The valley had its own weather. May learned that in the first week. Down in the settlements, when the sky went gray, you could see it coming from a long way off. You had time. Time to bring the animals in. Time to close the shutters. Time to prepare. Up here, the storms arrived without announcement. 1 hour, the sky was clear and hard and blue as a rifle barrel. The next, clouds were pouring over the eastern ridge like something being poured from a bucket. Fast, purposeful. Like the mountains had been saving it up and decided all at once to spend it. She was standing in the yard the first time it happened, talking to Declan Ward about the hay stores. And she wasn't talking anymore because the wind changed direction entirely in the space of a single breath, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees in what felt like seconds. And Declan looked up at the sky and said simply, "Inside." Now, they ran the snow hit before they reached the porch. May stood in the doorway of the lodge, breathing hard, watching the world go white in 30 seconds flat, and she thought, "This is where I live now." A place where everything can change before you finish a sentence. She wasn't sure yet whether that terrified her or suited her perfectly. Probably both. The first weeks organized themselves around observation. That was how May had always learned things. Watch first, ask second, touch third. Her father had taught her that with horses, and it had turned out to apply to most things worth understanding, so she watched. The compound ran on a schedule that nobody seemed to have written down, but everybody seemed to know. Before light, Declan Ward and 2 others checked the timber operations on the valley's north face. By sunrise, the workshop open, smoke from the chimney, the particular sound of metal on metal that meant something was being repaired or built or improved. Breakfast at the lodge at 7 sharp, not optional, not a suggestion. May watched how the men moved around Eli, not with the wariness of people who feared their employer, not with the false warmth of people performing loyalty. Something quieter, something that looked like respect, actual respect. The kind that gets earned rather than assumed. She watched him during breakfast. He sat at the same end of the long table every morning, ate what everyone else ate, asked questions about the work, specific questions, the kind that told you he already understood the answers and was checking whether you did too. He listened when the answers came back, really listened. Not the listening of someone waiting for their turn to speak. And she watched how he was with Bertie, the housekeeper, who had the manner of someone who had seen a great deal and judged very little, and would tell you the truth even when you hadn't technically asked for it. Bertie had worked for the Cross family since Eli was 7 years old. She called him Eli when no one important was listening, and Mr. Cross when they were. She refilled his coffee before he asked and removed his coat when he forgot to, and occasionally, in a voice like a door closing firmly, told him he was wrong about something. And he listened to her. That told May more than anything else had so far. She learned the land, not all at once, piece by piece, like her father had told her to. Start with what you know. Get to the rest from there. The valley was wider than it looked from the ridge. 2 miles across at its broadest point. 5 miles long from the northern cliff face to the southern pass. The creek that ran through the center of it was fed by snowmelt from 3 different ridges, and ran clean and fast even in winter, which meant the valley had never lacked for water. The timber operations covered most of the northern and eastern slopes. Managed harvest, that was the term Declan used. Not clear-cutting, not taking everything and moving on. Specific sections were harvested each year in rotation, giving the rest time to regenerate. The stumps were counted, The new growth was catalogued. It was, she realized slowly, more like farming than like logging. Who decided to do it this way? She asked Declan one afternoon. Watching a crew work a slope 3 ridges over, he squinted at her, like the question surprised him a little. Mr. Cross did, when he took over. His father ran it different. Different how? A pause. Faster, he said. And then he went back to watching the crew faster. She turned that word over. Thought about what faster meant in the context of a forest. Thought about what it meant in the context of a man's legacy and what he chose to do with it. Thought about Eli Cross choosing slower. On the 6th day, she found the ledgers, not by accident and not exactly on purpose. She'd been looking for paper to write her mother's letter. She'd promised, and May kept her promises the way her father had taught her, as a matter of basic integrity rather than sentiment. And she'd tried the small room off the main hall that she thought was a supply closet. It was not a supply closet. It was an office, and the shelves along the far wall were lined with ledgers. 12 of them, maybe more, organized by year, labeled in handwriting that was precise and small, and told you the person who wrote it did not waste space. She should have left. She stood there for about 4 seconds, telling herself to leave. Then she pulled the most recent one. The numbers were large, not just large. The kind of large that reframes everything retroactively. Not the comfortable wealth of a man who'd inherited enough and lived carefully. Working wealth of an operation that was genuinely, significantly, substantially successful. Contracts with railroad companies. Contracts with mining operations. Timber sales from 5 different sites across the territory. Not just this valley, 5 sites. She'd thought the valley was the whole of it. She'd looked at the compound and thought, this is what he has. This was not what he had. This was where he lived. She put the ledger back exactly where she'd found it, closed the door, stood in the hallway for a moment. How many people work for you? She'd asked. The first day in the valley. About 20, he'd said. In winter, he had not mentioned the other 4 sites. He had not mentioned the railroad contracts. He had not mentioned a lot of things, not lies, selections. Her mother's reply came 2 weeks later, carried up by a supply rider who made the lower pass, once a month, 3 lines only. Your father is weaker but still here. Still? Asking about you, I told him. You wrote. He said good. May folded the letter and put it in her coat pocket next to the contract. 2 pieces of paper, both of them anchors. She was not entirely sure why she hadn't mentioned the ledgers yet. Except that it felt like something she was meant to discover on her own timeline, and she hadn't finished discovering it. She found Eli in the workshop that evening. He was at a workbench in the far corner, bent over what appeared to be a broken piece of equipment. Some kind of gear mechanism for one of the timber saws, lamp burning, tools laid out with the same precision as everything else he did. He was so focused he didn't hear her come in. She stood in the doorway and watched him work for a moment. His hands were certain, unhurried. Taking the mechanism apart and laying the pieces in order. The way you do when you want to understand something completely before you try to fix it. You have other operations, she said. He looked up, not startled. He didn't startle. But he went very still for a beat. Yes, he said. 4 others. A pause. 5, actually. The ledger you found was from 3 years ago. She blinked. How did you? You had paper dust on your sleeve when you came to dinner. From the supply room shelf, he looked back at his work, which isn't a supply room. She felt heat rise in her face, which was annoying. She hadn't done anything wrong. She was allowed to be annoyed that she'd been caught before she decided to bring it up herself. You could have told me, she said. You could have asked. You could have led with it. I could have. He set down the small tool he was holding, looked at her directly. And then you'd have spent the last 6 days relating to the Empire instead of the Valley. I wanted you to know the Valley first, she opened her mouth. Closed it. She stopped. That's actually a reasonable explanation, and I find it extremely inconvenient that you have one. The corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile. But close. Sit down, he said. I'll tell you what you want to know, he told her, about the operations methodically. Not the way someone recites facts they've memorized, but the way someone describes their actual work. The valley was the operational center, the place where the primary harvest was managed, and where the leadership of the whole enterprise lived. The other 4 sites were managed by foremen who reported to Declan, who reported to Eli. Monthly reports. Or in inspections. Eli visited each site at least twice a year. 500,000 board feet in a strong year, railroad ties, bridge timber, mine shoring. The building wooded for a territory that was growing faster than it could keep up with itself. May sat on a stool across the bench from him and listened. Not passively, asking questions, real ones. The kind that showed she was actually following, not just waiting for him to finish. What's your biggest contract risk, she said. He looked at her. You want to know about contract risk. I want to understand what could go wrong. I find it helps to know the worst version of things ahead of time. Pause. Then the railroad expansion contract. Harrison Wells. His company has 3 years left on our current agreement. If he decides not to renew, that's 40% of annual revenue. What would make him not renew? Instability. Any suggestion that the operation isn't being managed well. He values consistency over everything else, and what threatens consistency right now. Ellie was quiet for a moment. Longer than the others, my uncle, he said. She'd heard the name before. Raymond Cross, in pieces. From Bertie Mosley, who mentioned it the way you mention weather. Factually, without editorial, but with the clear implication that the appropriate response was to take it seriously and prepare accordingly. Now Eli told her the whole of it. Raymond Cross, 54 years old, Harlan Cross's younger brother. For 20 years he'd been part of the family enterprise in a peripheral way, involved enough to feel. The actual, entitled to have no real understanding of it, rare understanding of it. When Harlan Cross was still healthy, Raymond had been manageable. Harlan kept him at a distance with a combination of financial stipend and deliberate exclusion from anything that actually mattered. Then, 11 years ago, a discrepancy in the books, a significant one, traced back to Raymond without much difficulty because Raymond, it turned out, was not nearly as clever as he believed himself to be. Harlan had him removed, formally, cleanly, legally, cut off. Raymond had contested it then, lost. 3 years ago, Harlan died and left everything to Eli. Raymond contested again, lost again, and now, he's found a different approach, Eli said, which is, he has a document. A contract, my signature on it, arranging a side deal with a competing railroad contractor, under-the-table pricing. The kind of arrangement that would void our contracts with Wells, and several others if it were real. May frowned. Is it? No, then your signature is forged. Yes, convincingly. Convincingly enough that I couldn't tell immediately when I saw it. And I know my own handwriting. She sat with that for a moment. The particular discomfort of it. Someone had been close enough, careful enough, patient enough, to replicate Eli's signature perfectly. That wasn't something you did in a hurry. That was something you planned. Who helped him, she said. Ellie's jaw tightened. Just slightly. Just enough. I don't know yet, he said, which was not the same as no one, and they both knew it. He's calling a stakeholder meeting, Eli continued. Denver. He wants to present this to the investors, Wells. The others. In front of a territorial official. He's framing it at a cover concern, questioning my competence, my judgment, the stability of the operation. A pause. He wants to be appointed as co-administrator. Once he has access to the finances, he bleeds it out, May said, within 2 years. Then blames the market conditions when it collapses. She looked at him. He's done this before. Not to me, but to... Yes, there's a pattern. Eli picked up the small tool again, turned it in his fingers, not using it, just holding something. My father bailed him out twice. The second time, my father told him there would not be a third. Raymond spent the next decade deciding that was an injustice. When is the meeting? 10 days. Which means we leave in 3. We. She noticed it. Didn't say so. Let it sit. You need me there, she said. I'm asking you, he said. There's a difference. She thought about her contract. Folded in the inside pocket of her coat. The one she carried because her father had said to carry money she controlled, and know the terms she'd agreed to, and never let anyone make her forget either. Partnership, the contract said. Not ownership. Tell me everything I need to know, she said. About Raymond. About the investors. About what I'm walking into. He looked at her across the work table. Something shifted in his expression. Slow and careful, and relieved, she thought. Something that looked a lot like relief. Starting tomorrow, he said. We'll go through it all, tonight, she said. We have 3 days. Start now. They worked until past midnight. He spread everything across the large table in his office. Maps, ledgers, contracts, correspondence, the notes his attorney Lawrence Holt had been compiling for the past 6 weeks. May sat across from him and went through it the way she went through everything, systematically. Start with what you know. Get to the rest from there. She knew more than Eli expected. She saw it in the small adjustments he kept making. The way he'd begin to explain something and then recalibrate when she asked a question that proved. She'd already gotten there. He wasn't condescending about it. He simply stopped explaining and started discussing, and there was a difference between those two things that she appreciated more than she said. Wells values stability, she said. Midway through the second hour, she was looking at his contract terms, running the arithmetic in her head. Consistency of supply, consistent pricing, no surprises. That's what keeps him. Yes. So Raymond's strategy isn't really about the forged contract. The contract is just the vehicle. What he actually wants is to make you look unpredictable, unstable, like someone whose judgment can't be relied on. That's right. Which means defending yourself against the specific allegation isn't enough. Because even if you disprove the contract, if you spent an hour being defensive about it, you've already demonstrated the instability he wanted to demonstrate. She looked up. You have to make look like the unstable one. Ellie was quiet. Every time he makes a personal attack, she continued, you respond with a business fact, clean, immediate, no hesitation. Make the contrast visible. He's emotional. You're factual. He's speculating. You have documentation. Ellie looked at her long. Where did you learn to think like this? He said. 5 years of watching people try to take things from my family, she said. You learn what works and what doesn't very fast when the stakes are real. He looked back at the papers. My attorney could have told you he charges $200 a day, he said. And he hasn't said anything half as useful. Your attorney, she said, has never had to negotiate from a position of having nothing. It changes your perspective. Denver arrived like a different world. She'd been to the town of Caldwell twice in her life. A settlement of maybe 300 people, with one main street and a general store and a church that doubled as a meeting hall. That was her reference point for civilization. Denver was, not that 30,000 people or more. Streets that were being paved, actually paved with stone, in the center of the city. Buildings 3 stories tall and 4 stories tall. And in one case, a hotel that went to 5, which seemed to her both unnecessary and privately magnificent. Gas lamps being installed along the main thoroughfare by men on ladders. The glass globes catching the afternoon light. The noise of it, she'd forgotten what crowds sounded like. The specific, layered chaos of many people, moving in many directions, some simultaneously, the horses and the carriages, and the voices and the distant sound of construction, that constant, always. The sound of a city building itself in real time. Allie moved through it without adjusting. Like he'd been here many times and stopped noticing it. He guided them to the Windsor Hotel with the directness of someone who knew where he was going and didn't need to make it look impressive. The lobby of the Windsor Hotel made May stop walking. She covered it quickly. 2 steps in, 1 beat of taking it in, then forward again. But Eli noticed. Of course he noticed. He said nothing, just walked her to the front desk. The clerk looked up, registered Eli's name in the ledger. His demeanor shifted in a way May had started to recognize, the subtle reorientation of a person who has understood that someone they were treating as ordinary is not, in fact, ordinary. Mr. Cross. Welcome back. Your usual suite is prepared. A glance at May, professionally calibrated. And for Mrs. Cross, the suite will be sufficient, Eli said. My wife and I prefer adjoining quarters. My wife, out loud, to a stranger, said with such complete matter-of-factness that nobody in the lobby had any reason to look twice. She found she didn't mind it, which was worth noting. The suite was 3 rooms. Sitting room, 2 bedrooms, a private bathroom with running water. She turned the tap at the basin and watched water come out of it, and thought about the creek in the valley and the water pump in the kitchen, and how neither those worked like this. Both bedrooms lock from the inside, Eli said, from the sitting room doorway. I'll be working most evenings. You'll have your privacy, I know, she said. You don't have to keep reassuring me. I'm not reassuring you. I'm informing you. There's a difference, she finished. Yes, I've gathered you feel strongly about that distinction. That almost smile again. Quick, gone, I need to go meet with Lawrence, he said. His attorney. You should rest. Tomorrow is going to be. I'm coming with you. A pause. It's a business meeting, May, I'm aware. I'm coming with you. He looked at her for a moment, calculating something. Then, fine. Lawrence Holt was 50 years old with the careful, contained, linked manner of a man who'd spent 3 decades being the smartest person in the room, and had learned to be quiet about it. He had offices on the 3rd floor of a building on Larimer Street. Neat. Professional. No unnecessary decoration. He shook Eli's hand. Looked at May with polite professional neutrality. This is my wife, Eli said simply. She'll be sitting in. Holt's neutrality didn't waver. But May caught the half-second assessment, the quick inventory of her clothes, her bearing, her youth, her mountain origins, before he redirected his attention to Eli. May sat in the corner chair, took out the small notebook she'd brought from the valley, and listened. They went through the strategy for 90 minutes. Raymond's likely approach, the investment concerns, the forged contract, how to handle the territorial official. Holt was thorough, precise. He anticipated objections with the skill of someone who'd spent years preparing for conversations he hoped would never happen. He was also, she noticed, treating this like a battle to life rather than a battle to win. There was a difference. Survival meant don't lose. Winning meant Raymond Cross walks out of that room with nothing. What about the personal attacks? She said. Both men looked at her. Raymond's not just going to argue business, she said. He's going to make it personal. He's going to question Eli's judgment, his character, his choices. How do we handle that? Holt glanced at Eli. She's right, Eli said. The standard approach, Holt said carefully, is to redirect. Don't address them at all, May said. Acknowledge that you heard him. Then return to business. Every personal attack gets answered with a business fact. It makes him look like he came here to air a grievance, instead of raise a legitimate concern. She paused. Because that's what he did. He came here to air a grievance. We just need everyone in the room to see it. Holt looked at her for a long moment. Mrs. Cross, he said, has anyone suggested you consider law? Once or twice, she said. I've found negotiating without a license works just as well. The morning of the meeting, May put on the green dress. Ellie had insisted on the dressmaker 2 days prior. She'd resisted. He'd been patient and immovable in equal measure, which she was beginning to understand was his default mode when he'd already made up his mind. It's armor, he'd said. Not decoration. She'd understood that. Armor she could work with. The dress was deep green silk, simple in its lines, expensive in a way that was visible without being theatrical. The dressmaker's assistant had spent an hour explaining how to move in it, how to sit, how to walk, how to manage the small train without making it obvious you were thinking about the small train. May looked in the mirror. The woman looking back was familiar, and not same face, same eyes, same jaw that people sometimes read as unfriendly when it was really just honest. But The dress changed the framing, the way a good frame changes a painting not by altering the image, but by telling you how to see it. She reached up, removed the hotel's pearl pin from her collar, replaced it with the small plain brooch from her coat pocket, the one that had been her mother's, silver, worn smooth. Don't forget, she told her reflection. She didn't need to say forget what. She knew. The territorial business office was stone and glass and deliberate authority, wide steps, heavy doors, the kind of architecture that said, decisions made here have weight. May walked in on Eli's arm. The conference room on the second floor was already occupied. 20 people, maybe more. Men in expensive suits doing the thing that men in expensive suits always do before formal proceedings, circulating, establishing alliances, collecting information through what looked like casual conversation and wasn't. She saw Raymond Cross immediately. You couldn't miss him. He stood near the head of the table, like he'd already taken possession of something that hadn't been offered to him. 54 years old. Well-dressed with the slightly too careful precision of a man who needed you to notice his tailoring. Thinning hair, the soft build of someone who'd lived well without working at it. His eyes, when they found Eli's, held the particular combination of contempt and anticipation that you see in people who've been waiting a long time for a specific moment and have decided the waiting was worth it. Nephew, he said, loud enough for the room. So good of you to make it. We're beginning to wonder about mountain schedules. We're early, Raymond, Eli said, even, flat. A statement of fact and nothing more. Raymond's gaze moved to May, assessed, the kind of look that was doing arithmetic and not trying to hide it. And this must be my wife, Eli said. May Cross. May extended her hand. Steady, Mr. Cross. Eli's spoken of you. Raymond took her hand. Held it a beat too long, has he? I imagine. His smile was practiced. Quite the sudden arrangement, wasn't it? The wedding. Most of us heard rather after the fact. We prefer to keep personal matters personal, May said pleasantly. I imagine you understand that. Something moved in his eyes. Quick, gone. She'd landed something. She wasn't sure exactly what yet, but she'd landed it. The meeting convened. The territorial commissioner, a silver-haired man named Aldridge, who had the careful neutrality of someone paid to appear neutral, took his seat at the head of the table. The investors arranged themselves at the far end. Harrison Wells. Conservative in dress and expression, his face doing the deliberate work of revealing nothing. Vivian Ashford. Elegant in severe charcoal wool, the only other woman in the room. Watching everything with the attention of someone who charged for her attention and made sure she earned the fee. Richard Blackwood, the Eastern money, younger than the others, with the restless energy of someone who'd arrived at wealth fast and was still calibrating what to do with it. May sat beside Eli and looked at each of them once. Kept what she saw. Raymond stood and laid it out in 3 parts. Efficiency losses from Eli's revised logging practices. Alienated partners due to what Raymond called idealism over practicality, and delivered with the particular relish of someone who'd been saving it. The forged contract, produced with theatrical timing from his inside breast pocket. The room went still. May watched Wells, watched Ashford, watched Blackwood, watched their faces do the work of assessing. Is this credible? Is this real? Should I be concerned? Now, she thought. Right now is the moment. Ellie started to speak. She put her hand briefly on his arm. 1 second. Just enough. Then she stood. The room turned to look at her. 20-odd people. All of them uncertain why the wife was standing. Commissioner Aldridge, she said. May I? Aldridge glanced at Eli. Eli nodded once. Mrs. Cross, Aldridge said. Go ahead. My husband will address the business concerns directly, and the numbers will speak clearly. She kept her voice level, unhurried. But I want to address something first. That contract, she nodded toward the papers in Raymond's hand, was not signed by Eli Cross. I know this not because I'm his wife and feel obligated to defend him. I know this because I have spent the past several weeks going through every contract, every agreement, every document bearing his signature in connection with this operation. The handwriting is close. It is not exact. And more importantly, she paused. The date on that contract is a Monday in late February. Eli was at the northern site with 6 workers and Declan Ward on that date. I have the site log if anyone would like to see it. She sat down. The room was quiet. Wells looked at the document in Raymond's hand, then at May, then at Eli. Raymond's smooth expression had developed. Up to crack, just one, just small. But there, he started. That's a claim with Hoot. It's a starting point, May said. The rest is documentation. And Eli opened the folder in front of him and began. He was different here than in the valley. Not a different person. The same merit and a different register. The quiet of the mountains was still in him, that unhurried, nothing wasted quality. But he was not deferring, he was not managing, he was presenting. And there was something in the way he laid out each point, precisely, sequentially, without defensiveness or drama, that told you clearly, this man built this, he understands it, and he is not confused by your questions. The profit margins, the sustainability data, the projected harvest timelines that extended well beyond anything Raymond's approach would have allowed, the worker injury rates under Eli's management compared to the industry average, the retention numbers, the fact that 3 of his 5 foremen had been offered more money by competitors and had stayed. Wells asked questions. Eli answered them directly. Ash was to ask sharper ones. Eli answered those too. And once, just once, May added a clarifying figure that Eli had cited from memory slightly differently than the ledger showed, and corrected it in 2 words and went back to listening. Ashford looked at her when she did it, a long look. Quiet and assessing. The kind of look from a woman who was weighing something carefully. Raymond tried several times to reinsert himself. Each time, Eli answered whatever professional point Raymond raised with a factual response and moved on. No emotion, no engagement with the personal undertones. Just facts, returned cleanly. Like throwing something back that had been thrown at you. And then, the fact remains, Raymond said, louder now, pulling at the professional edges of the conversation, that my nephew has demonstrated repeatedly questionable judgment in his personal life. A sudden, unexplained marriage to an unknown woman, an obsession with practices that cost money in the short term, an unwillingness to expand or take on new partners. These are the behaviors of a man who is either hiding something or fundamentally unsuited for the responsibilities he's been given. The room turned to May, because of course they did. She was the evidence he just put on the table. She felt it, the weight of 20 pairs of eyes. The particular discomfort of being made into a symbol by someone who'd never asked your permission. She let the silence sit for exactly 3 seconds. Mr. Cross, she said, quietly enough that people leaned slightly forward. You have described my origins as unknown. I'll save you the investigation. I grew up in a mountain settlement. My father was a rancher who spent 5 years ill before he died. My family had very little money and a great deal of debt. I married Eli, knowing exactly what I was agreeing to and why. None of that is a secret, because I have nothing to be ashamed of. A pause. What I'd like to understand is what any of that has to do with the timber contracts. Silence. Because from where I'm sitting, she continued, you came here to discuss business. And then, when the business discussion didn't go the way you'd hoped, you started discussing my husband's wife. She looked at Raymond directly. That seems like a problem with your argument. Not with his judgment. Raymond stared at her. Vivienne Ashford made a small sound. It might have been a laugh. It was too controlled to be sure. I think, Commissioner Aldridge said carefully, that we should perhaps return to the documented matters. They returned to the documented matters. And those matters, laid out cleanly, and with the particular finality of numbers that had been checked twice, told a story Raymond Cross not wanted told in this room. The operation was profitable, more profitable than it had been under Harlan Cross. Wells asked his final questions, received his final answers. sat back. Ashford was writing something. Blackwood was leaning forward with the expression of a man arriving at a conclusion he found genuinely interesting. The commissioner thanked everyone, said he saw no grounds for the intervention being requested. Raymond Cross sat very still, then he stood, and without a single word, he picked up his papers and walked out of the room. The room shifted, the way rooms do after something has resolved. The tension that had been present since the beginning, visible only in retrospect, simply dissipated, like air going out of something. Wells crossed the room to Eli, shook his hand, said something brief and professional about continued confidence in the operation. Blackwood followed with more enthusiasm, and a question about expansion plans, and Vivian Ashford moved toward May. She was not quite what May had expected close up. There were photographs in some of the newspaper clippings Eli had shown her, made her look formidable in a composed, remote way. In person, she was formidable, differently. The composure was real, but there was something warmer in it than the picture suggested, something that had lived a more complicated life than the official record implied. That was well managed, Ashford said. I told the truth, May said. In the right order, yes. That's the part that takes skill. Ashford looked at her steadily. I'd like to speak with you and your husband before you leave Denver. Not today. You've both earned a quiet evening, but soon. I have something I want to discuss. What kind of something, May asked. The useful kind, Ashford said. They walked out of the building and into the afternoon. Denver was doing what Denver always did, being loud and busy, and entirely unconcerned with what had just happened inside that particular room. May stood on the steps for a moment. Breathing Ellie stood beside her, not touching, just present. You didn't have to speak, he said. Yes, I did. She looked at the street below. We're partners. You said so. That means I fight when there's something to fight. He was quiet for a moment. Then, what you said about your father, your family. You didn't have to. I didn't do it for you. She turned to look at him. I did it because Raymond was trying to use my past to make me small. And I refused to be made small by the truth about where I came from. My father built 14 fence posts in August heat. He was the best man I have ever known. I'm not ashamed of a single thing about my life before you. Ely looked at her. Something in his expression that she didn't have a word for yet. Something she'd been watching build for weeks, carefully. Like a man who doesn't trust himself to move too fast towards something he wants. I know, he said. Quietly, like something he meant, they started walking. No particular direction. Just away from the building and into the ordinary noise of the city. And the thing that May noticed, that she would remember later, when she tried to identify the exact moment something shifted, was that they walked at the same pace, without adjustment, without one of them slowing or the other speeding up, just side by side, like they'd been doing it for years. That evening, there was a letter waiting at the hotel. Cream-colored envelope. Red wax seal. Deanna Cross, Raymond's wife. Requesting the pleasure of May's company at a small dinner gathering the following evening. An opportunity for the family to properly welcome the new Mrs. Cross. Informal. Just a few close friends and associates. May read it twice, handed it to Eli. He read it, his jaw went tight. Just slightly. You don't have to go, he said. What happens if I don't? She tells everyone you're afraid of her. Or worse, that you're unsuitable. He set the letter down. She'll make it a story either way. The question is which story? May looked at the letter. Small dinner. A few close friends and associates. Which meant 40 people minimum, and every one of them positioned to carry something back. Tell me about Diana, she said, smarter than Raymond and better at hiding it. She'll ask questions designed to expose what she considers your deficits, education, background, social history. And what's the right response to that? Most people try to compensate, try to seem more than they are, which is exactly what she's expecting. Yes. May picked up the letter, folded it along its original crease. I'll go, she said. But I'm not compensating for anything. The dinner at the Cross residence was everything the Windsor Hotel was not. The Windsor was grand in the way that good hotels are grand, impersonal, designed for a rotating population of temporary residents, beautiful in a way that didn't belong to anyone specifically. The Cross residence was grand in the way that people's ambition is grand. Every object selected to tell you something about the owner's self-image. Every room arranged to produce a specific impression. May noticed all of it, noticed it and set it aside. 43 guests. She counted. Small dinner. The string quartet in the corner was playing something she didn't recognize. The food arriving in careful sequence. Oysters first, which she had never in her life encountered. The wine. In glasses that probably cost more than the Hale family had cleared in their last good year. Diana Cross appeared within moments of their arrival. 45, maybe. Still beautiful in the way that money helps preserve. Diamonds catching the gas lamplight eyes. Doing something that her smile was working very hard to hide. May, like they were already intimates. What an extraordinary dress. Not quite Denver fashion, but there's a certain character to it. I imagine you find all of this quite overwhelming. Not particularly, May said, though the oysters are new. I appreciate the experience. A pause so small you'd miss it if you weren't watching, of course. Diana's smile adjusted. And how are you finding mountain life? I imagine the isolation must be difficult for someone. The briefest pause. Accustomed to a different kind of community. I find the mountains clarifying, May said. Everything is exactly what it appears to be. The weather. The land. The people. She met Diana's eyes. I've found that refreshing. Vivian Ashford appeared at May's elbow. Like she'd been waiting for the right moment, Diana. She said. Warm, entirely neutral. Thank you for including me. May. She touched May's arm briefly. When you have a moment. I'd like to introduce you to someone. And just like that, she pulled May sideways into a different conversation. That was well-timed, May said quietly. I've been watching Diana Cross manage rooms for 15 years, Ashford said. I can tell when someone needs an exit, a pause. Though to be clear, you didn't need it. You were doing fine, I know, May said. But I appreciated it anyway. The dinner itself was an endurance event. Diana maneuvered. Gracefully. Questions that landed like accidents. Comments that were compliments with the compliment removed. Comparisons to other women. Unnamed, vaguely described, clearly more suitable. Meant to create a standard May could feel herself falling short of. May did not fall short, she answered directly. Not defensively. Not apologetically. When Diana asked about her education, she described it accurately. When another woman asked how she'd met Eli, she told the truth, a simplified version of the truth but truth. When Helena Birch, wife of a mining investor, asked breathlessly if it had been love at first sight, May said it was honesty at first sight. Which I've found lasts better. That got passed around the room in whispers for the rest of the evening, and then Ashford found her again, near the end, in a quieter corner. I'll say it plainly, Ashford said. I came tonight specifically to observe you. I wanted to see how you'd handle a room that was arranged against you. Not in a board meeting, where the rules are formal. In a social situation, where the rules are invisible. And I'm satisfied. She produced a calling card. I want to meet with you and Eli tomorrow morning. What I'm going to propose is, she considered, significant. But I think you're both ready for it. May took the card. What kind of significant, she said. The kind that changes what the next 10 years look like. Ashford closed her bag. Get some sleep, Mrs. Cross. Tomorrow is interesting. The hotel room was quiet when May finally got back. Ellie was at the desk with papers. He looked up when she came in. How bad, he said. Not bad, she said. Educational. They talked it through. Diana's maneuvering. Ashford's offer, what came next. And then May asked the question that had been sitting in her chest all evening. What made you decide to do it differently? The operation, the way you changed things from how your father ran them. He was quiet for a moment, not avoiding. Considering, my father was effective, he said finally. He was not a cruel man. But he was a man who believed that resources existed to be used, that the point of a forest was the timber in it, that the point of a worker was the labor in him. He set down his pen. I watched what happened to the land on the eastern slopes that we'd worked hardest, what it looked like afterward, and I thought that what we were doing was borrowing, and not intending to pay back. So you decided to pay back. I decided to change what we were taking in the first place. She looked at him, at this man who had appeared at her door in worn canvas and threadbare wool, who paid in gold and stood with his back to the wall and chose slower when faster was available. That's a harder thing to do, she said. Change what you had instead of just continuing it. Yes, he said simply. She lay in the dark for a long time that night, not sleeping. Thinking, she thought about Raymond, about the forged contract, about the fact that Eli had said "I don't know yet" when she'd asked who'd helped Raymond. The yet had been deliberate. He knew it was someone. He just didn't have a name. She thought about Bertie, about the things Bertie had told her sideways. She thought about Gideon Pruitt, deputy marshal, 41 years old. His name had appeared twice in the correspondence files she'd gone through with Eli in preparation for the trip. Both times in contexts that were slightly off, not wrong, just slightly off. The way a door is slightly off when something has moved the frame without anyone meaning to, she would ask. Tomorrow, after Ashford's meeting, she closed her eyes. Outside, Denver kept doing what Denver did, loud and busy, and entirely unconcerned. And May lay in the dark and thought about fence posts, and her father's hands, and a man who chose slower when faster was available, and what it might to trust someone enough to fight for them before they'd asked you to. Don't, she told herself. Not yet. But the thought was already there. It had been there for a while, actually. She was just getting honest about it. She was up before the city, May dressed in the gray pre-dawn, and sat at the small writing foot by the window, opened her notebook, and wrote out everything she remembered about Gideon Pruitt. Not impressions, not feelings, facts. The kind you could point to, the kind that held their shape under pressure. He appeared in the correspondence files twice. First in a letter from 14 months ago, Eli thanking him for handling a property dispute on the eastern boundary of the valley. Second in a note from 7 months ago, Eli asking him about a licensing issue with one of the northern sites. 7 months ago, which was approximately when Bertie had told her Raymond began his most recent campaign. The timing between Raymond's renewed pressure and Pruitt's reappearance in Eli's correspondence was close enough to be interesting. Not close enough to be proof, but interesting. She thought about what Bertie had said sideways, about who knew the access routes, about how Raymond had never personally been to the valley but seemed to have very specific knowledge of its operations, specific knowledge, which had to come from somewhere, which had to come from someone. May closed the notebook, stood, and went to find Vivian Ashford before breakfast. Ashford's hotel was 3 blocks from the Windsor. Smaller, quieter. The kind of establishment that catered to people who valued discretion over spectacle. May arrived at 7:15, was shown upstairs to a private sitting room where Ashford was already at a table with coffee and documents spread around her. You're early, Ashford said. So are you? I never stopped. She gestured to the opposite chair. Sst, tell me what's on your mind, May laid it out. Cleanly, the correspondence files, the timing, Pruitt's name appearing 7 months ago, Bertie's sideways comment about someone with specific knowledge of the valley's operations who had no business having it. Ashford listened without interrupting. When May finished, the older woman was quiet for a long moment. Gideon Pruitt, she said finally. Not a question. You know him. I know of him. I know his father. His father was a decent man. She set down her coffee cup. I've had some concerns about the son for about 8 months. Financial irregularities. Not large enough to prove, large enough to notice if you're paying attention. Raymond's money, May said. Almost certainly. Ashford looked at her directly. If Pruitt helped create that forged contract, And I think he did because that level of detail about Eli's operations requires inside knowledge. Then we need evidence that's clean enough to present formally, not accusation. Documentation. What kind of documentation? Financial transactions. Payments from Raymond to Pruitt that can be traced and verified. She paused. I have a man who does this work. Quietly. Thoroughly. He's been looking at Raymond's accounts for 3 weeks at my request. May went still. You were already investigating. I was already suspicious, Ashford said. Suspicion without evidence is just noise. I needed the evidence to matter. A pause. What I didn't have was a reason for Pruitt to expose himself. He's careful. He won't move unless he thinks he's being offered something. What kind of something? Ashford's expression shifted, just slightly, the particular shift of someone who'd been waiting to say the next part. That, she said, is where you come in. The plan was simple. Simple plans were always the most dangerous. Simple plans had the fewest places to hide and the fewest excuses if something went wrong. But they were also, in May's experience, the ones that actually worked. Ashford's investigator had found 3 payments, substantial ones, moved through enough intermediary accounts to look accidental to an untrained eye, but traceable with patience. The documentation existed. What they needed was Pruitt confirming his own involvement, not to May or to Ashford, but to an independent legal witness who could testify to it. Which meant Pruitt needed to think he was safe. Which meant someone needed to give him a reason to believe he was still ahead. He'll expect to be contacted by Raymond, May said, after yesterday. Raymond lost in that room and Pruitt will want to know what comes next. Exactly. And then Raymond positioned to contact anyone usefully. He's managing his own collapse. So Pruitt will be waiting. Uncertain. Uncertain men make mistakes, Ashford said. Especially when someone offers them the impression that there's still an exit. An exit. May looked at her. You want me to be the someone. You're the only persons in this scenario. Pruitt has underestimated, Ashford said simply. Raymond underestimated you and lost a room. Pruitt wasn't there. He only heard the version Raymond would have told, which I guarantee made the failure everyone's fault but Raymond's. So Pruitt thought he was dealing with a mountain girl who'd gotten lucky in a formal setting. Good, there's one condition, May said. Name it. Eli doesn't know until it's done. Ashford raised an eyebrow. Just one. He'll want to be involved, May said. And if he's involved, Pruitt will see it coming. Eli is. She paused, choosing. Eli is not subtle about people trying to protect. A pause. And you are, Ashford said. I grew up invisible, May said. People what they expect to see. I've been using that my entire life. Ashford looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up her coffee. Drank it this time. All right, she said. Here's what we do. She told Eli she was spending the morning with Ashford, which was true. She did not mention the specific nature of what they were planning, which was selective. She thought about Eli saying that word, selective, the distinction he'd drawn between selective and evasive. She held it in her mind as she crossed the lobby of Pruitt's hotel, the cheaper one on the west side of town, the one that didn't ask too many questions, and told herself she would explain everything afterward, every detail. She would not hide. But first it had to work. Pruitt was in the dining room, alone. Pruitt took breakfast alone, always, in the same corner table. Back to the wall. May noticed the back-to-the-wall thing immediately. Eli did the same thing. For a moment that awareness sat in her chest like a stone. Then she crossed the room. Pruitt looked up when she approached, registered her. His expression went through 3 things very fast. Surprise, calculation. Something that wanted to be dismissive and couldn't quite commit to it because something in how she was walking told him dismissal might be a mistake. Mrs. Cross, he said. Mr. Pruitt. She sat down across from him without being invited. I thought Sash was speak. Privately. Before this gets any messier than it needs to be. A pause. I'm not sure what you think we have to discuss, he said. Careful. Raymond, she said. And what happens next for everyone involved? His eyes moved. just briefly. To the door, back to her. She let him look. Let him calculate. Raymond lost yesterday, she said. I imagine you know that. I heard something about the meeting. He lost completely. The investors are satisfied. The commissioner saw no grounds for intervention. She kept her voice level. Factual. Which means Raymond is going to need someone to blame for the failure. And the people in the most exposed positions are always the ones who helped him. Pruitt was very still now. Good. I'm not sure what you're suggesting I know about Raymond's. 7 payments, she said quietly. Over 8 months. The most recent one 3 weeks ago. Complete silence. She held it. Didn't fill it. Her father had taught her that. The person who fills the silence first is the person who's more afraid of it. Pruitt was afraid of it. He started again. You can't prove, Mr. Pruitt. She leaned forward slightly. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here because you helped someone create a document with my husband's forged signature on it, and I think you knew, somewhere, that it was going to go badly, and now it has gone badly. And only question is what position you're in when the formal investigation begins. He went white. Not pale. White, she kept her face neutral. Formal investigation was not a guaranteed thing. Not yet. But Pruitt didn't know what she knew and what she didn't, and uncertain men filled in the blanks with the worst version. What do you want? He said. Lo, I want the truth, she said simply. About the contract. About how it was made. About what Raymond asked you to do and when. And if I give you that, then you're the witness who came forward, rather than the accomplice who got caught. There's a significant legal difference between those two positions, she paused. I'm not your attorney, but I understand how these things tend to work. He looked at her, long she could see him weighing it. The mathematics of a person calculating which version of disaster was less disastrous. What he didn't know was that Ashford's legal representative was in the hotel, 2 tables over, nursing coffee. Appearing entirely uninterested in this conversation while hearing every word of it. What he didn't know was that the documentation Ashford had compiled was already in the hands of the territorial attorney's office. What he didn't know was that the investigation had already begun. May watched him decide. She watched the moment, visible if you knew how to look, when a person stops trying to find a way out, starts trying to find the least painful way through. The contract, Pruitt said, quickly. Tell me, she said, and he did. She came back to the Windsor at 10:30. Ely was in the sitting room, papers in front of him, cough going cold beside them. He looked up when she came in and something in her face told him immediately that something had happened. Where were you? He said. With Ashford. True. Mostly true. She sat down. And then I had a conversation with Gideon Pruitt. The silence that followed was its own kind of weather. You what? I spoke to Pruitt. Ashford's investigator had the financial documentation, the payments from Raymond to Pruitt, 8 months of them. I used that to get Pruitt to confirm his involvement to a legal witness this morning. She kept her voice steady. He confirmed everything. How the contract was made, Raymond's instructions, the timeline, all of it. Ashford's representative was present and has the full account. Pruitt will cooperate with the investigation in exchange for reduced exposure. Eli was on his feet, not toward her, just up, like he needed to stand and had nowhere particular to go. You went to Pruitt alone, he said. Yes, without telling me, yes. May, if you'd known, she said, you would have wanted to come. And if you'd come, Pruitt would have seen you and understood immediately that he was walking into something. He had to believe he was dealing with someone who didn't know the full picture. She looked at him directly. I was the only person in this situation he'd underestimated enough to be careless around. That's not. It worked, she said. Quiet, not triumphant, just factual. He stopped, stood very still, and then something happened that she hadn't anticipated. He turned toward the window. Away from her, and she saw it, the set of his shoulders. The particular way a person holds themselves when they're managing something they don't want visible. Not anger, Fear, Eli. He didn't answer right away, Eli. Look at me. He turned, and his face, for the first time since she'd met him, was not managed. Was not carefully arranged into the particular expression of a man who decided long ago that the safest approach to his own feelings was to have them very quiet where no one could see. I have lost everyone I trusted, he said, low, like the words cost him something. My father, Gideon, people I built things with. A pause. I sat in that room yesterday and watched you defend me in front of 20 people, and I thought, this is the person I am not going to lose. His jaw tightened. And then you walked into a situation alone, with a man who helped forge my name on a legal document, and didn't tell me because I couldn't risk you. I know why you did it, he said it like the knowing made it harder, not easier. I know exactly why, and you were right. Strategically, tactically, you were right. He looked at her. And I am still terrified. That's the honest answer. I'm terrified of what could have happened, didn't. The room was very quiet. May looked at this man. This complicated, carefully broken man who'd shown up at her door in threadbare wool and paid in gold and stood with his back to the wall. In every room he entered, because some part of him was always watching for the thing that was going to go wrong next. I am not going anywhere, she said. You don't know that. I know it today. She stood, crossed the room, stopped in front of him. And today is what we have. Today is what anyone has. You don't get a guarantee, Eli. Nobody does. You just get the person in front of you choosing. Again, he looked at her. Then, don't do that again, he said, without telling me first. I'll tell you first, she said. If you stop keeping me outside the walls, a long pause. The walls, he said. You know what I mean. He did. She could see that he did. That's a fair trade, he said finally, slowly. Like a man agreeing to something that frightened him and deciding the fright was worth it. Good, she said, and then, because she didn't know what else to do with everything that was sitting in her chest, and because her father had told her to be brave but not reckless, and she had decided that this particular moment was brave. Rather than reckless, she put her hand on his arm. Just that, just her hand on his arm. He looked down at it and didn't move away. The second meeting happened 2 days later, not in the territorial office, in a smaller room, a formal conference room in the attorney's building on Blake Street. Commissioner Aldridge again. The same 3 investors. Raymond's attorney conspicuously without Raymond because Raymond had been advised by his own counsel that attending was inadvisable. Pruitt's testimony was read into the record, all of it. May sat beside Eli and listened to Pruitt's account of what Raymond had asked him to do. The timeline, the payments, the specific afternoon, a Wednesday in late January. When Pruitt had spent 3 hours in Raymond's Denver study, practicing Eli's signature from samples Raymond had accumulated over years. The careful work of a man who'd convinced himself he was just doing a job and not building the foundations of his own destruction. The room was quiet. In light of this testimony, Aldridge said, and the corroborating financial documentation provided, I find no grounds to continue the governance review of cross-timber operations. Furthermore, I am referring the matter of document fraud and conspiracy to the Territorial Prosecutor's Office for formal review. Wells shook Eli's hand afterward. Brief, firm. My office will send over the renewal paperwork next week. I see no reason to delay. Blackwood caught May's eye from across the room and gave a small nod. And Vivian Ashford, the last to leave, stopped in front of both of them. I'd like to come to the valley, she said. For the consultation I mentioned, I want to see the operation in person before I finalize what I'm going to propose. You're welcome anytime, Eli said. Ashford looked at May. I should tell you both, and I mean both of you specifically, that what I'm going to propose involves 2 separate agreements. One with Eli regarding the timber consultation, and one with you directly. She looked at May with the directness of a woman who'd spent decades being taken less seriously than she should have been, and had stopped accommodating it. Your agreement will be your own terms. Your own compensation, not contingent on your marriage. May felt something shift in her chest, not surprise, exactly. Something larger than surprise. The particular sensation seen accurately by someone who had no obligation to look. I'll be there, May said. They left Denver 2 days later. The same route back, north and up. The city falling away behind them and the mountains rising ahead, and the particular quality of the air changing as they climbed, thinning, sharpening, becoming the air she'd been breathing for weeks now, and had already started to think of as simply air. They rode at the same pace. Side by side where the trail was wide enough. Single file where it narrowed. May didn't look back, not because she was avoiding it, because there was nothing behind her that she needed to hold on to. Her mother would come in spring. She'd already written the letter. Helen Hale deserved the valley. Deserved to see what her daughter had what her daughter was building. On the second afternoon, high in the pass, where the trail narrowed to its most treacherous point, and the drop fell away sharp to the left, Eli's horse stumbled, not badly, not dangerously, just a hoof on a loose stone, a shift, a recovery that was smooth and immediate. But May was right behind him, and she felt her own heart contract in the half-second before the recovery happened. "You're all right," she said. "Not a question, fine," he said. "Just a loose stone." They kept moving. But she noticed, for the first time, that she'd reached for her reins tighter, without deciding to, that her body had responded to his stumble before her mind had caught up. She sat with that for a moment. Didn't say anything about it. Some things you needed to sit with for a while before you knew what to do with them. The valley received them the way it always did, without ceremony, without announcement. Just there, suddenly, as you came around the last curve of the descent, the lodge on its rise, smoke from the workshop chimney, the creek catching the late afternoon light, the horses in the south paddock lifting their heads and then going back to the grass. Wren nickered when she saw the stable. May patted her neck. "I know. Me too." Declan met them in the yard, took a look at their faces, both of them, and made the assessment of a man who'd worked for Eli long enough to read the weather of a situation without needing it explained. "Go well," he said. "Go fine," Eli said. Declan nodded once. He took the horses and they walked to the lodge. Bertie had dinner on the table. She looked at May when they came through the door, one long look. The kind that inventoried a great deal of information very quickly. Bertie made a sound that meant several things at once, none of which required elaboration, all of which were warm. Then quietly, so only May could hear, "I knew it would be you. Didn't know your name yet. But I knew it would be someone like you." May looked at her. Bertie had already turned back to the stove. She put food in front of them and left them to it. They ate in the particular succulence of people who are tired in the good way, tired from actual work, actual effort, actual things that mattered. Outside, the valley sounds, wind in the pines, the creek. An owl starting up in the east trees, the sound of it moving across the dark. May thought about the ledgers in the office, about the 5 operations on the map she hadn't seen, about Ashford's proposal, which would ask her to be something specific and her own, and not contingent on her marriage, about what it meant to have a plan. For a future. Building rather than surviving. She thought about her father. Be brave, May. But not reckless, she thought. Papa, I think I'm getting the balance right. The letter came 3 weeks after they returned. Spring was beginning in the valley, tentative, cautious, the way spring always is at altitude. Patches of green appearing in the south-facing slopes. The creek running higher and faster from the snowmelt. The letter was from her mother. 3 lines in her mother's handwriting. Careful and shaky in the way that people's hands get when they're writing something they've been postponing. Your father passed on the 11th, in his sleep. He was not in pain. He asked me to tell you he was proud, not because of where you are, because of how you got there. May read it on the porch, alone. She sat with it for a long time. The grief came. Of course it did. She'd been expecting it, and it came anyway, the way grief always does. larger than the anticipation of it, shaped differently. She cried without being particularly aware of deciding to, just sat on the porch steps with the letter in her hands and let the valley be around her while it happened. Walter Hale, 43 years old, builder of 14 fence posts in the August heat, whistler of tuneless songs. Man who'd taught her that capable people are safer than dependent ones, that a contract works both ways, that looking back never helped anyone. Man who died, knowing his daughter was standing on her own feet. She hoped it had been enough. She thought it might have been, when Eli found her. How much later? Time had gone strange. He sat down on the step beside her without asking what was wrong. She showed him the letter. He read it, handed it back. "I'm sorry," he said. The plain kind of sorry. The kind that doesn't try to do more than it is. "He knew I was all right," she said. "He knew before he went." "Yes. That matters to me. I know it does." They sat on the steps for a while. The valley going about its business around them. Life continuing to be life. "I want to bring my mother here," May said. "In the spring. When the pass is clear, I'll send Declan to meet her," Eli said. "She'll argue about the help. Tell her it's for the horses, not for her." "She can argue about that instead." May almost laughed. The almost was enough. "There's something else," she said. "Tell me." "I've been thinking about Ashford's proposal. She wants me to help her assess operations. Not just timber. Mining, land management, other industries. The perspective of someone who's looked at these questions from the side that doesn't have the money. That's a real skill," Eli said. "I know it is." She looked at him. "I want to take it. As my own arrangement, my own work." "Yes," he said. "Simple, immediate. You don't need to think about it?" "No," he met her eyes. "You've been doing this work since you got here. You just haven't had a name for it or been paid for it. Both of those things should change." She looked at him for a moment. "You're very easy to agree with when you're being reasonable," she said. "I'll try to be reasonable more consistently. I'll hold you to that." Vivian Ashford arrived in late April with 2 assistants, a cartographer, and enough surveying equipment that Declan looked at the pack horses with the expression of a man recalibrating his afternoon plans. She stayed for 8 days. May showed her the timber operations, not as a tour guide but as someone who understood what she was looking at and why it mattered. She walked Ashford through the harvest rotation system, the regeneration data, the worker management practices, the cost analysis of sustainable versus extractive approaches, over 15-year and 30-year projections. On the 5th day, Ashford laid out 2 formal proposals on the table between them. Eli's, a consulting arrangement advising on timber management practices for 2 of her mining operations. May's, a broader role, a formal position as operational assessor, visiting Ashford's various enterprises and producing reports on the human and structural systems she found. The things that couldn't be captured in financial statements. The things that required knowing how to look. "What you did in Denver," Ashford said to May directly, "the way you read Pruitt, the way you read the room at the stakeholder meeting, the way you read Diana Cross's dinner." She paused. "That's not strategic thinking in the formal sense. That's something older and more practical. You know what's real and what's performed. Most people who've grown up with money can't do it. They've been insulated from the consequences of getting it wrong." "I haven't been insulated from anything," May said. "No. And that's your advantage." Ashford looked at the proposal on the table. "I want to use that advantage. Formally. With compensation that reflects its actual value." May looked at the number at the bottom of the proposal, looked at it twice, because her brain kept trying to make it smaller than it was. "That's." She started, Ashford said. May picked up the pen, signed. Summer came to the valley in its own time, unhurried, sure-footed. The way Wren moved through terrain she trusted. The snow retreated to the highest peaks and stayed there. The gardens Declan's crew had planted in April came up green and insistent. The creek dropped to its summer level, still strong, still cold, but less urgent about it. Helen Hale arrived on a Tuesday in early June. Declan met her at the lower pass with 2 horses, and enough patience for a woman who insisted she didn't need help with her own bags, and then accepted help with her own bags after 3 minutes. He brought her up through the last of the narrow trail and into the valley, and she stood where May had stood 8 months ago, at the last curve with the valley spread below. May was on the porch when they came down the slope. She watched her mother's face. She watched her mother's face. Watched the particular expression of someone who'd been managing their expectations very carefully and having them exceeded anyway. Helen got off her horse, looked at the lodge, at the workshop, at the gardens, at the mountains on all 4 sides, pressing in with their enormous different permanence. Then she looked at May. And May went down the steps and her mother grabbed her the way mothers grab daughters they've been worried about for 8 months. Hard. Both arms. The particular grip of someone who needed to verify through touch that the person was real and solid and present. "You didn't tell me," Helen said into May's shoulder. "I told you enough. You told me practically nothing. I told you I was well. That was true." Her mother pulled back, looked at her face, the way mothers do, reading everything that's been happening in the absence of letters. Helen looked at her for a long time. "You're happy," she said, like she was still deciding whether to believe it. May paused, chose the honest answer. "I'm building something, and it's mine. And that makes me the happiest I know how to be." Helen looked past her, to where Eli had come out onto the porch, stood at the top of the steps, waiting to be introduced. She studied him the way she'd studied everything for 50 years, thoroughly. Without rushing, "That's him," she said. "That's him. He's taller than I expected. He is. He looks like someone who doesn't say unnecessary things. He really doesn't." Helen made a sound. "Good. I've had enough of people who say unnecessary things." She picked up her bag and started toward the steps. "Well, introduce me. And then I want to see the garden." Declan told me about the garden. Ellie came down the steps, and Helen Hale, who had sent her daughter into the mountains with a stranger and prayed about it for 8 months, looked at Eli Cross, the way she looked at everything she needed to understand. He met it. Didn't look away. Didn't manage his expression into something easier. "Mrs. Hale," he said. "I'm glad you came. Are you?" Helen said. "Yes." She looked at him for another moment. "My husband said," she began slowly, "that you could tell the character of a man by whether he met your eyes when he said something uncomfortable." She paused. "He met mine, the one time I asked him, something that was going to cost him." She tilted her head. "You're doing that now. I know what this was for your daughter," Eli said. "I know what she gave up to come here. I don't take that lightly." Helen looked at May. May looked back, and her mother nodded once. The nod of a woman who'd made a decision and was at peace with it. "Show me the garden," Helen said to Declan, who had appeared at the right moment. "Before these two start saying significant things and make me stand here in the sun while they do it." Declan almost smiled. He led Helen toward the garden, and May and Eli stood in the yard, alone. "She's going to tell you exactly what she thinks of everything," May said. "Good. About the operation. About the lodge. About me. About you. I wouldn't expect otherwise. She'll be here all summer. She's welcome all summer." May looked at him, at this man, this complicated, careful man who'd appeared at her door in worn canvas, and paid in gold and offered her a contract and chose over and built something in a valley that no map showed and never asked anyone to see him as more than what he was. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes. The morning you came to our cabin. You'd been watching for 3 weeks, you told me. But you came the same morning as Garrett." She paused. "Why that morning?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because that morning I watched you stand at the window," he said. "Before Garrett arrived. Before any of it. You were counting the fence posts. I was in the tree line, and I could see your lips moving, and I counted along with you." He met her eyes. 14. And the way you looked at them, like they mattered, like each one was something worth holding on to. He paused. "I thought that's a person who understands. that the things built with effort are the ones worth keeping. She held that, for a moment, the fence posts. Her father in the August heat. "You should have said that," she said. "When you proposed, I didn't know how. You could have tried, I know." His face did something she hadn't seen before. The management dropped all at once, like a door opening from the inside. "I'm trying to be better at that. I know you are." The afternoon light was long and gold across the valley. The kind of light that made everything look like it had always been there. Like it had always been exactly this and nothing else. May took one step closer, and then another, and he didn't step back. She put her hand against his chest, felt his heart, faster than she expected, faster than his face was showing. He was better at the face than the heart. She noted that. Kept it close. "I choose you," she said quietly. "I want you to know that, not because of the contract, not because of what you have or what you built, because of how you look at 14 fence posts and understand why they matter." She paused. "That's what I'm choosing." He put his hand over hers. "Against his chest, I know," he said. "And then, I choose you too. I chose you the moment you said still a lie and didn't take back the words to make me feel better," she laughed. "A small one. Real, terrible romantic moment to remember," she said. "It's the one I have. I'll take it." And he kissed her. Properly, without the reserve of a man managing distance. The kind of kiss that has weeks of careful restraint behind it and doesn't apologize for that. The valley went about its business around them, the workshop, the creek. Helen's voice from the garden telling Declan something emphatic about tomato steaks. Wren in the paddock standing in her patch of sunlight. Autumn came. Then winter, then spring again, and this time May recognized the signs earlier. The particular quality of the melt, the way the creek changed its voice, the way the birds returned in a sequence she'd learned to read. She had learned the valley the way her father had told her to. Better than anyone, in some ways. Better than men who'd been here for years because she'd arrived without assumptions and had seen it clear. Ashford came twice more. The consulting work had expanded. May's reports, she wrote them herself, in the careful, precise handwriting she'd taught herself from her grandmother's letters, were being read by people she'd never met in cities she'd never seen. They changed things. Small things, then larger ones. The way a particular mining operation treated its injured workers. The way another restructured its seasonal labor agreements. Not everything, not all at once, but something. The training program was Eli's idea. May's design. A pact with callous palms. A formal apprenticeship for workers from struggling settlements. The kind of background she'd come from. The kind where intelligence and capability went undeveloped. Because there was no pathway to develop them. 10 workers, the first year. 17 the second. Learning not just timber work, but the mathematics behind it. The planning, the management, one of them, a girl of 19 from a settlement 3 mountains over, reminded May so much of herself at that age that she found it difficult to look at her directly sometimes. The same jaw, the same careful watching, the same math running constantly behind the eyes. She gave her the good assignments, made sure she understood why. She wrote to the girl's mother, said, "She is the smartest person here. Make sure she knows it." On a morning in late autumn, May stood at the window of the lodge. The same window, the same view, but not the same. Never the same twice. Because the valley changed with the light in the season, and the particular configuration of clouds against the peaks and what you were bringing to it when you looked. She'd been standing here for 11 minutes. She knew because she'd counted. Not because she was afraid, or calculating or trying to hold something at a distance. Just because some habits are the shape of who you are. Some habits are how you know yourself. Eli came up behind her. He didn't ask what she was thinking. He knew enough now to know when she was thinking, and when she was just being, and which one this was. "My mother wants to plant more in the East Garden next spring," May said. "She's made Declan draw her a plan. It's ambitious. She's ambitious. She comes by it honestly." May turned her head, just slightly, enough to see his profile. the beard a little longer in the autumn. The gray at his temples she'd noticed was spreading and had decided she liked. The particular quality of stillness in him that she'd thought, once, was coldness, that she knew now was something else entirely. The stillness of a man who'd learned early that the world was not safe, and had built carefully around that knowledge and was, slowly, carefully, learning to build differently. I was thinking about something, she said. Tell me. I was counting fence posts, she said. Same as always. The morning Garrett came. The morning you came, I know, he said. I was counting with you, and now. She looked out at the valley, the workshop smoke, the south garden, the horses moving in the paddock, the crew coming in from the north slope for the midday meal. Her mother's voice from somewhere inside, telling the cook something with the particular authority of a woman who'd been running a household longer than the cook had been alive. Now, when I count things, it's different. I'm not counting what's left. I'm counting what's been built. He put his hands on her shoulders, not pulling her back, just there. Present. How many? He said. She looked out the window, counted the fence posts around the paddock that Declan's crew had built last spring. The garden rows her mother had organized. The new apprentice workshop. The creek channel that had been cleared and reinforced. The training program with its 17 workers. The letters she'd sent. The reports that had changed things. The woman in the East Mountain settlement who was managing her own household accounts. Now, because May's report had led to a payment structure that made that possible, the 14 was a child's number. These were too many to count. More than I can keep track of, she said, his hands on her shoulders, solid and present. Good, he said. She leaned back, just slightly, into the warmth of him, and the valley went on being what it was. Hidden from anyone who didn't know to look, visible to everyone who did. Built by people who understood that the things worth having are the things you build with your hands and your choices and the long, patient work of someone capable of keeping them. Outside, Wren stood in the paddock in her patch of sunlight, not going. Exactly. Where she meant to be, $340. That was where it started. Not with love, not with grand gestures. With a number on a piece of paper and one honest choice made by a woman who had nothing left to lose except herself. She hadn't lost herself. That, in the end, was the whole of it.